It was a crisp morning in downtown New York, and the courtroom buzzed with an air of anticipation. The heavy wooden doors of the courthouse creaked open, revealing a tense scene unfolding inside. At the center of it all stood Olivia Carter, a young and determined attorney, poised at the plaintiff's table. She had faced many challenges, but today's trial felt different. It felt like the culmination of everything she had worked for. Opposite her, sitting high on his throne of authority, was Judge Gerald King, a man notorious for his leniency toward the police and his unwavering support of corrupt officers. Judge King was no stranger to controversy. Known for dismissing countless cases involving police misconduct, he was a figure the public had long suspected of favoring law enforcement. His stern face twisted into a smug grin as he scanned the room, fully aware of his power and the control he held over this trial. His eyes briefly met Olivia's, and for a fleeting moment, she felt the weight of the system pressing down on her. But Olivia stood unwavering, her mind focused on one goal: justice. The gallery was packed with spectators, most of whom had gathered in support of the victims who had suffered under the hands of the Teflon twins, two rogue officers whom Olivia was determined to bring to account. As the trial began, the air grew thick with tension. Olivia was ready for this fight, knowing full well that this courtroom battle would define not only her career, but also the very fabric of justice in her city. She was about to face a powerful adversary, but Olivia was certain that truth and courage would prevail, no matter the odds. Olivia Carter was no stranger to adversity. At just 28 years old, she had already established herself as a brilliant, up-and-coming lawyer. A recent graduate from Yale Law School, Olivia had joined a small nonprofit organization dedicated to fighting for the rights of the oppressed and the marginalized. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood in New York, Olivia had witnessed firsthand the injustices that plagued her community. It was those early experiences that fueled her passion for law and her unwavering determination to create real change. Her journey into the heart of this battle began when a local pastor, Reverend Malcolm Turner, approached her with a case that had shaken the city. The case involved two corrupt police officers, Connolly and Vaughn, known to the streets as the Teflon twins, because of their ability to avoid prosecution despite multiple complaints and accusations of brutality. These officers had long terrorized the community with their violent tactics, using their positions of power to escape any real consequences. But this time, things were different. The Reverend, along with other community leaders, had gathered a trove of evidence, witness statements, video footage, and numerous allegations that could finally hold the officers accountable. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Olivia knew she faced an uphill battle. The entire legal system seemed to protect these officers, starting with the powerful Judge Gerald King, who had long been known for dismissing cases involving police misconduct. It was a tangled web of corruption that went far beyond the officers themselves. It reached into the very heart of the judiciary. But Olivia was not deterred. Her determination grew stronger each day as she worked tirelessly to gather more evidence, interviewing victims, poring over case files, and seeking out any shred of truth she could find. Though young, Olivia had proven time and again that she was not easily intimidated. She was fearless in the courtroom, and her calm, collected demeanor in the face of adversity made her a force to be reckoned with. As the trial began, she stood tall, knowing that the road ahead would be difficult and that her fight was not just for the victims of police brutality, but for the soul of the justice system itself. Olivia had never been one to back down, and she wasn't about to start now. She would stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. Olivia knew the path ahead would be tough, but she also understood that the fight for justice was never easy. As the trial began, the courtroom seemed like a battleground, a place where truth and power clashed in a high-stakes contest. But it wasn't just the defendants that Olivia was up against. The real challenge lay in the judicial system itself, a system that had for too long been tainted by corruption and favoritism. Judge Gerald King's reputation for protecting law enforcement officers was well known, and Olivia had no illusion about how difficult it would be to break through the walls of power he had built. In the early days of her investigation, Olivia realized that this was not just a case of police brutality. It was a case of systemic injustice. To bring down the Teflon twins, as Connolly and Vaughn had come to be known, she would need more than just the stories of the victims. She needed hard evidence, tangible proof that could not be ignored or dismissed. The first step was to meet with the victims themselves, many of whom had suffered in silence for far too long. Some had been brutalized by the officers during routine traffic stops. Others had been caught in violent raids where they were treated as criminals without cause. Every time Olivia sat down with a new witness, she felt the weight of their stories. There was the young woman who had been slammed against the hood of her car during a traffic stop, her arm broken in the process. There was the man whose face had been beaten to a pulp by Connolly and Vaughn after he was falsely accused of drug possession. These were not isolated incidents. They were part of a long-standing pattern of misconduct, a string of abuses that no one had been willing to address. Olivia's heart ached as she listened to their testimonies, but at the same time, she felt a growing sense of resolve. This wasn't just about fighting for individual victims. It was about fighting for justice on a much larger scale. Olivia spent countless hours at the community center, going through mountains of documents, poring over video footage, and transcribing affidavits. She knew that every piece of evidence she could gather would help build a stronger case. But it wasn't enough to simply collect the facts. She needed to ensure that they would be heard, especially in front of a judge like Gerald King, who had a long history of siding with the police. Olivia wasn't naive. She understood that without proper documentation and credibility, even the most shocking evidence would be dismissed. The first breakthrough came when she managed to obtain a video from a bystander who had filmed one of the Teflon twins' most violent acts. It was shaky, taken from a distance, but it clearly showed Connolly dragging a young man across the street by his cuffs, his face battered, pleading for mercy. Olivia knew this video would be pivotal in exposing the officer's actions. However, the moment she tried to submit the video to the court, she was met with resistance. Judge King, ever the ally of the police, dismissed the footage, claiming it lacked proper authentication. But Olivia was prepared. She knew that in order for the evidence to be accepted, she needed more than just the video. She needed proof that the footage was genuine, that it had not been tampered with. She worked tirelessly to track down the original source of the video, contacting the bystander and gathering a chain of custody for the footage. She even enlisted the help of a tech expert who could verify the timestamp and metadata of the file, ensuring that it could not be dismissed on technical grounds. In the meantime, Olivia continued to gather more evidence. She interviewed more witnesses, each one adding a new layer to the story. The victims were often reluctant to speak out, afraid of retaliation from the officers who had tormented them. But Olivia's persistence paid off. Slowly, the truth began to take shape. As the pieces fell into place, she started to see the full extent of the corruption that had been allowed to thrive within the police force, and she realized that bringing down the Teflon twins was just the beginning. The deeper she dug, the more she uncovered about the ways in which the justice system had failed the very people it was supposed to protect. Despite the obstacles, Olivia remained focused on the task at hand. She knew that in order to expose the full scope of the corruption, she had to stay one step ahead of those who would try to silence her. As the trial continued, Olivia's resolve grew stronger. She had gathered the evidence, but now it was time to present it in court. She would face Judge King again, and she knew he would do everything in his power to dismiss her claims. But Olivia was prepared for the fight. She had the truth on her side, and she wasn't going to back down. In the days leading up to the trial, Olivia worked with her colleagues to carefully organize her evidence, making sure everything was airtight. She reviewed witness statements, double-checked the video footage, and ensured that every document was in order. She knew the importance of presenting a clear, compelling case, one that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. It was a daunting task, but Olivia was determined. This was more than just a case to her. It was a chance to make a real difference, to expose the corruption that had plagued her city for far too long. She wouldn't stop until justice was served. As Olivia continued to present her case, she quickly realized that the fight for justice was far from over. The road ahead was even more difficult than she had anticipated. Judge Gerald King, with his decades of experience on the bench and his clear bias towards law enforcement, was not going to let her succeed without a battle. Every time Olivia gained ground, King seemed to throw up another obstacle, using his authority to undermine her efforts at every turn. The trial quickly became a frustrating game of cat and mouse. Olivia had witnessed firsthand the kind of power that Judge King wielded, and she understood that the real challenge was not just proving the Teflon twins' guilt, but breaking through the systemic corruption that had allowed them to operate with impunity for so long. King was no mere figurehead. He was a man with deep ties to the police union, and he had long been known for dismissing cases that could threaten the status quo. Each day in court, Olivia found herself facing more obstacles. King regularly interrupted her line of questioning, dismissing critical pieces of evidence before they could even be fully presented. When it came time to question the victims, King would ask pointed and often hostile questions, undermining their credibility in front of the jury. He would frequently dismiss their emotional testimony, questioning whether they had truly been harmed by the police officers. It was as though he was going out of his way to discredit every single one of her witnesses. His tone was patronizing, his body language dismissive, and Olivia couldn't help but feel as though he had already made up his mind about the outcome before the trial even began. The most frustrating part was how the judge blatantly sided with the defense at every opportunity. Olivia had expected some pushback, but King's actions were a direct attack on her ability to present a fair case. She would submit video footage of the officer's misconduct, and King would dismiss it on the grounds of technicalities, claiming that the timestamps or metadata couldn't be verified. He refused to consider the context, refusing to even look at the clear evidence of police brutality before him. When Olivia would try to object to these interruptions, King would overrule her with little explanation, shutting her down before she had a chance to explain why her arguments were valid. The frustration was mounting, but Olivia refused to let it break her. Despite the constant resistance from the bench, Olivia held her ground. She wasn't the type to give up easily, and the more King tried to shut her down, the more determined she became. She started to document everything meticulously, keeping track of each moment where King overstepped his bounds. With the help of her team, Olivia began building a case against the judge himself. If King was going to act as a barrier to justice, she would expose his corruption, no matter what it took. However, it wasn't just King's actions that were holding her back. The defense, led by the skilled attorney Thomas Berryman, also knew how to play the game. Berryman was a seasoned lawyer, known for his ability to get law enforcement officers off the hook, no matter how damning the evidence. He tried to paint Olivia as a partisan activist, suggesting that her personal bias was clouding her judgment and that she was out for revenge against the police. His cross-examination was brutal, designed to wear down both Olivia and her witnesses. Berryman's strategy was clear: make the case about Olivia's personal motives rather than the facts. He attempted to discredit her by questioning her previous involvement in activism, suggesting that she had a personal vendetta against the police. In doing so, he sought to paint her as someone who couldn't be trusted to present an unbiased case. This tactic was a familiar one: attack the messenger when you can't attack the message. As the trial continued, Olivia felt the pressure mounting. She had worked so hard to gather the evidence and build the case, but King's resistance, coupled with the aggressive tactics of the defense, made it feel as though the system itself was working against her. There were moments when she felt utterly alone, standing in front of a room full of people who seemed to believe that justice could never truly be achieved. But Olivia knew she couldn't back down. She had come too far, and the truth had to be heard. Even as Judge King's bias became more obvious and the defense tried to manipulate the narrative, Olivia found strength in the people she was fighting for, those who had been silenced for too long by the very system that was supposed to protect them. But every day was a new challenge. Olivia was not only battling the officers and their powerful connections, but she was also up against a system that had long been broken. Still, despite the immense challenges, Olivia knew that she couldn't stop now. The truth was on her side, and she would continue to fight for it, no matter how many walls she had to tear down. As Olivia's frustration mounted in the face of Judge Gerald King's constant interference, a small glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon. Late one evening, just after the day's proceedings had ended, Olivia's phone rang with an unexpected call. It was a friend from law school, now working at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. "I caught a snippet of your hearing on the local news," her friend said. "That judge you're up against, he's notorious. We're keeping an eye on him from the federal side, too. Hang in there." The word struck Olivia like a lightning bolt. "What do you mean, keeping an eye on him?" she asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and cautious optimism. Her friend paused before continuing. Off the record, yes. There's chatter about Judge King's conduct in the courtroom, and it's not just about his rulings. We've heard rumors about his ties to the police union and some less than legal activities. If anything substantial comes to light, we might have a way to bring him down. For the first time in weeks, Olivia allowed herself a breath of relief. This was the break she had been waiting for. Federal attention on Judge King could provide the leverage she needed. If she could tie King's actions to broader corruption within the system, then maybe, just maybe, the entire structure of abuse could be dismantled. But she also knew that this was dangerous territory. Going up against a judge who had this much power could be risky, but Olivia was not one to back down, especially when she saw a potential opportunity to expose the truth. With renewed determination, Olivia pushed forward with her investigation. She met with her friend from the U.S. Attorney's Office, who gave her the green light to continue gathering evidence on King's misconduct, especially his financial ties. The tip she had received about the judge's possible involvement in bribery and racketeering was more than just a rumor. It was a lead that could change the course of her case. Olivia knew that finding concrete evidence would be crucial. If she could link King to any illegal financial dealings, it would be the smoking gun she needed. Olivia, with the help of her team, began to dig into King's financial records. They subpoenaed documents, tracked down witnesses, and followed the money trail. It didn't take long before they unearthed some disturbing information. They found a series of large, unexplained donations made to King's personal account, coming from sources that were tied directly to the police union. Even more troubling were the bank statements that revealed large sums of money flowing into King's account in exchange for favors, including dismissals of police misconduct cases. Olivia was careful with every step. She knew that this kind of evidence needed to be handled meticulously. As she reviewed the financial documents, a sense of dread began to settle in her stomach. The scale of the corruption was becoming clearer, and it was even more widespread than she had initially thought. King was not just a corrupt judge. He was at the heart of a much larger network of corruption involving the police union, and various other powerful figures in the city. During a late-night meeting with her U.S. attorney friend, Olivia was told that they had secured a meeting with the FBI to discuss the findings. The federal authorities were now taking her case seriously, and their involvement would bring a new level of scrutiny to Judge King's actions. The prospect of a federal investigation into the judge was a turning point in Olivia's fight for justice. It was no longer just her against the system. Now, she had the full force of the federal government behind her. The next day, as Olivia walked into the courthouse, she felt a mix of excitement and fear. The trial was still ongoing, but now there was the potential for a major shift in the momentum. Olivia had gathered evidence that not only pointed to the Teflon twins' misconduct, but also implicated Judge King in a web of corruption that reached far beyond the officers themselves. This could be the moment that changed everything. She had to be careful, though. If King suspected that she was onto him, he would stop at nothing to protect himself. Olivia kept her focus as she entered the courtroom, preparing herself for the next round of legal battles. But she also knew that, with the support of the federal authorities, the tide was slowly turning in her favor. The corrupt walls of power that had shielded King and the Teflon twins were beginning to crack. Olivia's commitment to exposing the truth had finally gained the attention it deserved, and she was more determined than ever to see this case through to the end. With new allies in high places, she was now armed with the resources and support necessary to take down the corrupt system that had ruled over her city for far too long. With the federal authorities now involved in her case, Olivia knew that the battle for justice was reaching a pivotal moment. The new alliance with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI gave her the confidence and resources she had long been missing. However, the task at hand remained daunting: to connect the dots and expose the full extent of the corruption that had allowed the Teflon twins and Judge Gerald King to operate with impunity for so long. The evidence she had already gathered was compelling, but Olivia understood that to bring King down, she needed a smoking gun, something irrefutable that would force the courts to act. Olivia's team dove into the next phase of the investigation with relentless focus. Armed with the tip about King's involvement in a corrupt financial network, they began tracking down more detailed records. The deeper they dug into the financial aspects of King's dealings, the more disturbing the picture became. The judge, it seemed, was not merely an ally of corrupt officers, but an active participant in a scheme to launder money, shield law enforcement from scrutiny, and intimidate anyone who threatened his position of power. One evening, as Olivia reviewed a series of suspicious financial transactions, something caught her eye: a series of unreported wire transfers flowing from a bank account linked to the Fraternal Order of Police, directly into an account under Judge King's name. The amounts were staggering, and the timing of the transfers coincided with several key cases where King had dismissed charges against police officers accused of brutality. It was clear that this wasn't a coincidence. Olivia felt a chill as she continued to piece together the documents. It was becoming more and more evident that King had been taking money in exchange for his protection of officers like Connolly and Vaughn, who had terrorized the community for years. As the federal investigation began to heat up, Olivia worked tirelessly to ensure that the evidence would hold up under scrutiny. She contacted a financial expert who could help untangle the complex web of transactions and verify the authenticity of the records. The expert confirmed what Olivia had feared. The transfers had been made using elaborate methods to disguise the origin of the funds, but there was no denying that King had been involved in a significant bribery scheme. The FBI, now fully invested in the case, helped Olivia secure additional subpoenas to dig even deeper into King's financial history. But the true breakthrough came when Olivia received an unexpected call late one night. It was from a whistleblower within the courthouse. The source, who had worked as a clerk for Judge King for several years, provided Olivia with a set of documents that would prove to be the key to dismantling the entire operation. The documents included details of secret meetings between King and high-ranking police officers, as well as notes on how King had been involved in decisions to remove or alter evidence in cases involving police misconduct. The most damaging piece of information, however, was a handwritten note from King himself, instructing an officer to take care of certain witnesses who might testify against the Teflon twins. With this new set of evidence in hand, Olivia felt the weight of the case shift in her favor. She knew this was the moment she had been waiting for, the final piece of the puzzle that would expose Judge King and the Teflon twins for the criminals they truly were. Olivia immediately contacted the federal agents and shared the information, knowing that they would act swiftly to follow up on the new lead. The urgency was palpable as the FBI moved to seize the documents and interview the whistleblower. This was no longer just a local case. This was a full-blown federal investigation, one that would shake the very foundation of the city's justice system. In the days that followed, Olivia and her team worked around the clock to prepare for the next phase of the trial. They knew that Judge King's corruption had been exposed, but they also understood the stakes had never been higher. King and his allies would not go down without a fight. As the trial neared its critical juncture, Olivia received word that the FBI had enough evidence to bring federal charges against King and the Teflon twins. It was a monumental step forward, but Olivia remained focused on what came next. Now, with the evidence she had painstakingly gathered, Olivia felt more confident than ever that she could see this fight through to the end. She was no longer alone in her quest for justice. The federal authorities, the victims, and the community were all rallying behind her. The pieces were finally falling into place, and Olivia was determined to finish what she had started. She had uncovered the full extent of the corruption that had plagued her city, and now, she was prepared to bring it all to light. The battle was far from over, but Olivia was ready for whatever came next. With the discovery of Judge Gerald King's extensive corruption, Olivia could feel the pressure of the case begin to shift in her favor. The evidence she and the federal team had uncovered was overwhelming, but Olivia knew that the true test would be whether they could bring all the pieces together in a way that could not be dismissed. It wasn't just about proving the guilt of the Teflon twins or exposing King's financial misdeeds. It was about showing the world that this kind of systemic corruption could no longer be allowed to thrive in silence. Olivia was no longer just fighting for the victims of police brutality. She was fighting for a broken system that needed to be fixed. The day of the trial's final phase arrived, and Olivia was ready. The Teflon twins, Connolly and Vaughn, sat in the defendant's chair, their once arrogant demeanor now noticeably subdued. They had become the face of a much larger issue, an issue that was rooted in corruption at the highest levels of law enforcement and the judicial system. Judge King, who had once commanded respect in the courtroom, now found himself at the center of the storm he had helped create. His smug confidence had disappeared, replaced by a look of barely concealed fear. The federal investigation into his actions had made it clear that his days of wielding power unchecked were over. As the proceedings resumed, Olivia presented her case with the calm, methodical precision she had spent weeks preparing. She began by presenting the irrefutable evidence that had been gathered over the course of the investigation. First came the financial documents that detailed the bribes and donations flowing from the Fraternal Order of Police into King's account. She meticulously outlined the timing of the transfers and how they corresponded with key cases where King had dismissed charges or ruled in favor of the officers. The judge's involvement in the cover-ups was laid bare before the court, his every action now scrutinized and exposed. Then came the testimonies, witness after witness, all recounting their experiences with Connolly, Vaughn, and the other corrupt officers who had preyed on their community. These were not just stories of individual abuse. They were pieces of a larger puzzle that painted a clear picture of how deeply the corruption ran. The emotional weight of the testimonies resonated with the jury, and Olivia could see the shift in the room as more and more people began to grasp the full scope of the conspiracy. As Olivia continued to build her case, the defense, led by Thomas Berryman, tried desperately to undermine her efforts. He attempted to discredit the witnesses, questioning their credibility and accusing them of exaggerating the truth. Berryman also attacked Olivia personally, suggesting that her past activism and personal involvement in the case clouded her judgment. But Olivia had prepared for this. She remained calm and composed, knowing that Berryman's attacks were nothing more than distractions, attempts to undermine the facts that were staring everyone in the face. What followed was perhaps the most shocking moment of the trial. Just as Olivia was about to present the final piece of evidence, an explosive video recording of Judge King meeting with police officers to discuss how they could suppress testimony and manipulate cases, the courtroom doors swung open. Federal agents entered, their presence causing a ripple of anxiety in the room. They were there to announce the charges against King, Connolly, and Vaughn. The charges included racketeering, bribery, and obstruction of justice. This was the moment Olivia had been working toward, the moment when the full weight of the law would come down on the corrupt individuals who had been manipulating the system for so long. The room was stunned into silence as the news sank in. Even Judge King, who had spent his career controlling the courtroom and dismissing any threats to his power, couldn't hide his panic. The Teflon twins sat frozen, unable to escape the reality of the situation. The federal authorities had now taken control of the case, and the evidence was too overwhelming for anyone to deny. Olivia felt a rush of triumph mixed with disbelief. After all the setbacks, the resistance, and the constant undermining, this was the turning point. The system had finally begun to turn on those who had abused it, but Olivia knew that this was only the beginning. While the federal charges were a huge step forward, the real work was just beginning. It would take months, perhaps even years, to bring the case to trial and ensure that justice was fully served. But in this moment, Olivia knew that they had won the most important battle. They had shown the world that no one, not even a powerful judge or a pair of corrupt police officers, was above the law. As she stood in the courtroom, Olivia allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. This was more than just a victory. It was a testament to the power of persistence, integrity, and the belief that, no matter how deep the corruption runs, truth and justice can always find a way to break through. The fight was far from over, but Olivia had made it clear that she would not stop until every last piece of the puzzle was exposed and every person responsible was held accountable. The day of reckoning had finally arrived. After months of intense investigation, relentless preparation, and the hard-fought battle in the courtroom, Olivia stood poised as the final decision was made. The weight of the trial's outcome hung heavy in the air, not just for her, but for the victims whose lives had been scarred by the brutality of the Teflon twins and the corrupt protection they had received from Judge King. Today, they would learn whether justice would be served or if the system would continue to turn a blind eye to the abuses of power that had plagued their community for so long. As the jury deliberated, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Olivia stood at the plaintiff's table, her heart racing. She had presented the evidence. There was no denying the truth any longer. King's corruption, The financial ties to the police union, the cover-ups, and the abuse of power were all laid bare. The witnesses had spoken their truth, the victims had testified to their pain, and Olivia had fought tooth and nail to ensure that those in power would not be allowed to escape justice. Yet, in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the fear that the system might still fail her. But as the jury returned to deliver their verdict, Olivia's fears began to subside. The foreperson stood and read the unanimous decision. We, the jury, find the defendant Judge Gerald King guilty on all counts of racketeering, bribery, and obstruction of justice. We also find the defendants, Officers Connolly and Vaughn, guilty on all charges of police brutality and conspiracy. A collective sigh of relief swept through the courtroom. For the first time in a long while, Olivia felt the weight on her shoulders lift. She had won. It wasn't just a victory for her. It was a victory for the victims, for the community that had been silenced for so long, and for the very principles of justice that had been violated by those sworn to uphold the law. The system had been shaken to its core, and for once, it had worked as it should. As the courtroom erupted in applause, Olivia took a moment to absorb the magnitude of the moment. She had faced insurmountable odds, but she had never wavered in her pursuit of the truth. And in that moment, she understood that the fight for justice was never easy. But with determination, integrity, and a commitment to doing what was right, even the most powerful systems of corruption could be dismantled. The lesson was clear: justice may be delayed, but it is never truly out of reach.